Poo, shits, turds, craps, cleaving steamers, dropping the kids off at the pool, turds, did I say that one? Today, I'm going to be talking about fibre and some of the digestive benefits of fibre, why it's important for our diet, why we need it, what are the different types, how to know how much you're getting and how much you actually need. So fibre is a really important part of our diet. It comes mainly from things like skin-on fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts, pulses, beans. Anything that kind of has a skin on or a shell will tend to have a good amount of fibre in it. We need fibre in our diet for a couple of reasons. The first being it helps keep us kind of fuller and satiated along with protein. I've talked about this previously. But fibre will actually help slow down gastric emptying, so essentially digestion, which is especially important if you've had kind of a high sugary meal as well. If you've got a lot of fibre in there, that can kind of offset some of the blood sugar spikes you might get. So lots of fibre in there will actually slow down digestion and then drip feed nutrients into the bloodstream. Fibre is often something that is lost in Western diets in particular. Because a lot of our food is processed, we'll often have the fibre stripped out, and so we lose the benefits of it. The two major needs for fibre, firstly it's really important for our gut health and our gut bacteria in particular. Good bacteria in the gut, their food of choice, their dish of choice, if they're dining out, is fibre. They love it. We as humans can't break fibre down, so they'll do that for us, and they'll break them down, smash it up, tear it to bits, and then they form things like short chain fatty acids, things like butyrate. Short chain fatty acids, the more and more we look into those in science, the benefits are kind of massive. For instance, butyrate in particular helps to reduce inflammation around the body, a nice natural way of doing that. Short chain fatty acids are really important for keeping our gut lining nice and healthy and our gut wall intact. And they're also really important for helping produce what we call neurotransmitters, which are chemical signals between the gut and the brain, and all of that comes from kind of good fibre in the diet. And then it also, a certain type of fibre is really important for actually creating size, texture and motility essentially of your poo, which is a bit of a kind of a disgusting notion, but really important aspect, especially if you're someone that goes perhaps a little too often or doesn't go quite enough. Fibre can actually help with kind of both those. So there's two distinct main types of fibre that we need and get from our diets. The first being soluble fibre. Now, soluble fibre, as the name suggests, dissolves in water. We eat soluble fibre, it makes its way through kind of relatively untouched into the large intestine, where the good bacteria are waiting to feast on it, and they break it down and they form those short chain fatty acids as I spoke about. And then the other type is insoluble fibre, and as the name suggests there, that doesn't dissolve in water. So often people think, well, what's the point if it doesn't dissolve in water and our gut bacteria don't break it down? What do we need it for? Well, it's the insoluble fibre in particular that will add the size, the shape, the texture, as I mentioned, to your poos, and also help with kind of that motility rate of moving it along your gut in particular. Then a kind of a subset or a subdivision of fibre would be kind of something called resistant starch. And resistant starch is almost a little bit like a hybrid between the two, in that it makes its way through the gut relatively untouched, a little bit like insoluble fibre. But then when it gets to the large intestine, it's actually broken down and fermented by the good bacteria. So it's kind of a double whammy. And resistant starch in particular is really high in things like green peas and green bananas, but also really high in brown rice and brown spaghetti, which is kind of surprising. But even more so in cooled down brown rice and brown spaghetti. Something structurally happens to the starch there, and it actually increases the amount of resistant starch. So all of those that are taking their packed lunches or Tupperwares to work with brown rice and brown spaghetti that's been cooled down, you've actually increased the amount of resistant starch in your diet. So that's a pretty cool side benefit in my opinion. So then we talk about the amount of fibre we need. A lot of people, as I said, are struggling to get the amount of fibre they need because either they're not eating enough fruit and vegetables or they're eating quite a lot of kind of processed foods. The recommended daily intake is somewhere between 25 and 30 grams per day, and that can be a little bit tricky to kind of know what that looks like or how much you're actually getting. So there's a couple of ways you can kind of think about tracking your fibre intake. The first would be using something like MyFitnessPal. Like that will help kind of you figure out how much fibre is in those different foods. But to give you an idea of kind of the rough amounts, so most vegetables, one portion of vegetables will contain around 2.5 grams of fibre. A portion of fruit will contain around half of that. On the upper scale of things like red kidney beans, I haven't actually got a can of red kidney beans. Things like red kidney beans, about 100 grams, so a quarter jar of red kidney beans will contain around 8 grams of fibre. A sweet potato or a portion of brown rice will contain about 5 grams. So you can start to see how you can accumulate those throughout the day. But also with one portion of veg containing 2.5 grams, it kind of puts that notion of 5 portions a day a little bit in the grey. I think we should be aiming kind of more for that region of 10. So you can actually track it. Or quite a nice way of getting enough fibre in your diet, which I've talked a lot about, is actually just this diversity and range of fruits and veg, whole nuts, grains, seeds, beans and pulses. The more variety you can get in those, the more different types of fibre and different amounts of fibre you're going to get. If you always eat the same fruits and veg, they're probably going to have obviously the same amount of fibre in them, and they might not actually have that much fibre in them in general. Actually getting diverse different sources of fibre is an easy way to ensure you're getting enough. In general, try and keep things unprocessed where possible. As I said, that tends to strip out a lot of fibre. And yeah, go for kind of whole food sources. In general, kind of some of the higher levels of fibre foods we'll discuss briefly. Things like onions, garlic, leeks, they're really high. Chicory, asparagus. So often with asparagus we'll cut away the end, and that's actually full of really good fibre, but it is quite chewy. So if you just slice that up really thinly and add it to whatever you're cooking, you won't even almost be able to taste it or taste the difference in terms of kind of textures. Just dice it up really thinly. The same with kind of ends of any fruits and vegetables, like the roots bit. Really good sources of fibre, but just needs you to kind of dice it up nice and thinly so you don't get that kind of horrible taste in there. And then finally, things like Jerusalem artichokes, also really good source of fibre. A quick note on fibre though is that if you're someone that's quite new to eating lots of fruits and vegetables, whole grains, nuts and seeds, those sorts of things, go steady with it because they can cause a bit of uncomfort, shall we say. I remember when I first got into fruit and vegetables, that sounds a bit weird, but when I decided to kind of actively and consciously eat way more than I had been, I came home from work one day and decided to eat this huge bowl of really like fibrous vegetables, and it was one of the worst nights I've ever had in terms of kind of stomach pain. So do go gentle with it. Equally, if you're someone that suffers some kind of IBS type symptoms or have had kind of bad bloating in the past, go steady and implement these quite slowly. Those foods I talked about, kind of the onions, garlic, leeks, chicory, asparagus, they're quite high in what we call inulin, a type of fibre. That, if you consume too much, if you have those kind of symptoms in the past, can exacerbate them. That doesn't necessarily mean they need to be avoided, but it's just about creeping them in slowly in very small quantities into your diet. See how your body responds, see what the reaction is, and then you can kind of slowly increase from there. In terms of getting enough insoluble and soluble fibre, most kind of different sources will have some insoluble and some soluble. It's hard to kind of define exact soluble sources and exact insoluble. So getting that variety, different sources, will ensure you're getting kind of enough of each as well. A word of warning: if packaging in like supermarkets and shops says it's a good source of fibre or high in fibre, it should list on the label the amount of soluble and insoluble fibre it has in the product. If it doesn't list that, it's likely just kind of marketing, so just keep an eye out for that as well. So again, top sources to include kind of as regularly as possible: beans, oats. When it comes to oats, try not to go for those super fine ones, the instant kind of oats, because they've been overly processed and get rid of a lot of the fibre. So the bigger, jumbo, chunkier ones will have kind of more good fibre source in there. Peas, green peas, sweet potatoes, regular potatoes with their skin on, cauliflower, apples, pears, anything with its kind of skin on will all be great sources.